Today, we're going to talk about how to not just build trust within our fellowships, but how to rebuild trust. Sometimes rebuilding something, as we see in scripture, can have its own unique challenge. Todd and Patty serve as congregational evangelists and women's ministry leader for the Dallas-Fort Worth Church. Todd has a doctorate in chiropractic medicine and a master's in Christian ministry from Abilene Christian University. Patty has a degree in journalism from the University of Missouri. They served several churches in the Midwest prior to moving to Texas in 1996. They have served in the full-time ministry for over 35 years. Guys, that's a long time. Todd and Patty were married in 1988. They have two sons, Blake and his wife, Erin, and they have their other son, Grant. Todd enjoys disc golf and spending time with friends. Patty enjoys yoga and cooking and is always trying new recipes. Todd, welcome to the channel.
Thank you, Kyle. Looking forward to spending time with you.
Absolutely. First, will you tell us a little bit about your conversion and why you went into the ministry?
Oh, that could be a long story right there. So I was reached out to in the early 80s by a brother in the Chicago church when it just started. I think the Chicago church was probably about 30 members, different people that moved from all parts of the Midwest to start the Chicago Church of Christ. And I remember a guy reaching out to me, asking me if I'd like to come to church. And I just moved to Chicago. And I was like, sure, great, I'd come to church. I really enjoyed it. It was at 2:00 in the afternoon, which was a killer, but I liked the guy. He became a study partner for school. And, I liked the church. I thought it was heartsy. And, one thing led to the other. I remember Marty Fuqua asking me if I wanted to study the Bible. And I remember looking at him thinking, what the heck? I mean, people our age don't study the Bible. I thought he was crazy. But I thought about it. And you know what? I was thinking about God. I still have a diary from back then that probably about once a week I'd write into it. And I remember over and over again, I'd say, man, something's wrong. Something's just not feeling right. And after about 2-3 months of writing things like that, I put in there like, man, I know it's my relationship with God. Just something's missing. And that's when they asked me to study the Bible. And so, I'd love to sit there and say I was super humble and became a disciple right away. But I was a toad. I was immature, and I just really had to go through some things. But eventually, I became a disciple in the early days of the Chicago church, and it's been a great story, a great ride ever since.
I actually want to go to the second question first, which is there are many factors that create security and trust between churches. Okay. What are some keys to helping churches trust one another? But let me actually put a caveat in there. It's not just churches trusting one another, but people trusting one another who are within a fellowship. What are some keys that you would just start us off with in terms of our understanding?
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Well, I think, a church is a bunch of people with a lot of stories. And I think what's really important is that you got to have good theology. And one of the things I think I've learned as I've gotten older is good theology is based on how God views us. For instance, I love Genesis. And so early Genesis, you can see God has a really high value of man. So he loves man, even the ones who are really messing up. Luke 15, both sons, they're both messing up, but he loves both sons. He wants a relationship with both sons, and he wants both sons to be unified, connected relationally. And I think for us as individuals, we have to really work hard on building great relationships, great friendships. In fact, I'll be talking about that at the small church workshop in Dallas later this week. And so it's really no different from churches. one of the things I've seen is that you have to work on relationships in other churches, and not just with the point person, but with different layers of the church. And so, the Dallas church, Patty and I have been here in the Dallas church now 24 plus years, and we love it here. Texas is our home. We did a Midwest tour up in Chicago and different cities in the Midwest. Moved to Chicago, or moved to Dallas from Chicago, and I think the some of the big churches in our fellowship back in like the 80s, or specifically the 90s, I would say pillaged a lot of other churches, just took a lot of people, from other regions of churches to build up, you might say, like the big mega churches. And when I started leading the Dallas church about 13, 14 years ago, I was like, I want to change that. I want the Dallas church to be a giving church. And how can we support? How can we give? How can we build our family of churches? And so, we've really invested a lot into the other Texas churches, definitely the smaller ones, and it's attractive to other people. I know there's a family in the Dallas church here that saw that, and they wanted to be on board with that. And so we started what we call the Campus Ministry Fund. And this couple basically gives anywhere from $100,000 to $150,000 a year to help build campus ministries outside of the large churches in the Midwest and the Heartland churches. And their only requirement, their only ask was, can the big churches contribute to it? And I was like, absolutely. So, we spoke to Houston, San Antonio, Kansas City, St. Louis, and like, guys, this family wants to help other churches, and all they're asking for is us to participate, to give to it. And so I think between those two regional family churches, I think probably $300,000 a year are going towards small churches every year for the last, 5-6 years maybe. And we've just created, how can we give? How can we give? Financially, people. St. Louis, not St. Louis, I'm sorry. Kansas, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Oklahoma City, Lubbock. These are all churches that we've sent people to that have come out of Dallas. And, San Antonio has also done that with College Station. But how can we give? And I think when people know you love and you're really willing to serve and give to them with no strings attached, boy, that opens up doors of communication. We're able to talk. And I think that's what's really helped us, just really having a conviction. And our board knows this. Our eldership knows this. I remember one time we were having a board meeting, golly, probably about 5-6 years ago. And one of my board members basically accused me of being Santa Claus, always wanting to give gifts, wanting to give things away. And I looked at him and I laughed about it, and everyone laughed about it. But, I think he wasn't too happy with me. But at the same time, I was like, amen. You know what? If I'm going to have a nickname, or people are going to look at me one way, I think Santa Claus is probably a good thing, willing to bring gifts. So I think with that mindset now, we've created this really strong unity in Texas and the Heartland, actually. I'm really close to Vince up in St. Louis, Kevin in Kansas City, Willie and Lawrence there in Omaha with him. It's very close. And so when there's that spirit of, hey, I want the best for you, people want to be connected.
So when I'm hearing you say a couple of key things, number one, you've got to have a good theology. And I'll just say in therapeutic terms, I believe that good theology is therapeutic. And I think for a lot of people I would say their theology has needed some therapy, right?
Sure.
And when we don't get the theology right, it affects how we think about growing and how we think about strengthening our churches. And so what I'm really hearing you say is you've got to start out with a good understanding of taking care of people, right? If God has a really high value on man, so should we. And so you get that when you go back. And then what I hear you saying is take care of those who are not maybe the size that you are, those who don't have some of the things that bigger churches have. Take care of each other. Don't pillage,
Mm.
don't look for gain necessarily, right? Especially if it comes at the expense. And those things can seem to last in people's memories for quite a while. And so I really appreciate what you're saying. Am I getting part of what you're saying
Yeah.
right?
No, absolutely. Totally. Absolutely. Totally believe that. And I think when you believe that and live it, then other people want to live it. And I think then you get more partners, more people that want to get on board and have that spirit, like the couple I mentioned here in the Dallas church. And they want other churches to be involved. So it builds a synergy.
So one of the things that, for our audience for a moment, I kind of just want to move throughout Christendom, right? We think about Christianity as a whole. One of the opposing forces that you find for a lot of fellowships is they're trying to strike a healthy balance of autonomy and unity, right? Togetherness and separateness. And we find that in psychology and family systems and all of that. That's actually what the challenge is there as well. This is a human condition issue of togetherness and separateness, autonomy and unity. What are some important factors to consider as we try to keep a balance of those two? Because how we do that builds or breaks down trust.
Oh boy. The thing about this time like this, our time is short and we can write books on this topic and spend whole weeks in discussion on this. So again, getting back to the good theology, I love John's theology, the Gospel of John, his epistles, the Revelation, and you see Jesus praying in John 17 is praying for all the future believers, and unity was top of the list. Love is top of the list. Certainly, bearing fruit, top of the list. And I think the challenge we have is when we start being overly concerned about autonomy, we're asking the wrong questions. Something is wrong. It's like a marriage. If the husband says to the wife, well, hey, I'm the husband, you need to respect me. That's a desperate move. And in some ways, he's already lost the battle. He's lost the discussion. And
Wow,
something
good
deeper,
point.
something much deeper needs attention. And so in my mind, successful unity between churches is all about relationships and collaboration. Why we do need some structure. Unity doesn't come by a hierarchy or a position. It's all about love, relationship, mutual respect. And I think a lot of that was born out of Patty and I's history and some of the things that we went through as we were younger. And then again, good theology. What's God's view? What's God want? My wife and I became disciples. We're going to do it Jesus's way. And during the time, our first 10 years in the church, actually, I should say, first 10 years in the full-time ministry, because it took a few years of me graduating from chiropractor school before I went full-time. But Patty and I were involved in actually two church splits. We saw two churches split. And, these situations were incredibly painful, but they created deep convictions in us about unity. Years ago, back in the early 2000s, the Dallas church was going through a difficult time, and we lived out in like Fort Worth, South Fort Worth, and people came to us and asking, hey, should we split off? Or they were actually encouraging us to split off from the Dallas church and start our own ministry. And we actually could have done it pretty easily, but we refused to because we had seen the pain and the spiritual devastation that the church splits caused. At that time, we were very unhappy and might have split off if we hadn't developed the convictions that we had about unity and the horrors that we experienced in the church splits. And if we had done that then, that rebellious thing, in my mind, you can imagine what it would have done to the Dallas church as a whole, perhaps its effect on Texas as a whole, and even my wife and I's spiritual walk. we would be more isolated and distrustful. And so, I think we really developed very strong convictions about, okay, relationships. We're going to work on our relationships. We're going to work how we love. We're going to work how we communicate. We want to do it Jesus's way and not the world's way. And so, again, I'm not trying to build my own empire. I'm trying to build God's kingdom. And so it's
Right.
not about who's right, it's what's right. I don't have to be right. I don't care if I'm right. I just want what's right. And so I'm not tied up into, okay, well, my opinion or what I think or what people think about me. I don't care. And so I love having a group
Wow.
of men and women around me who are opinionated, and they have a lot of thoughts. And I'm like, I want to hear those thoughts, because many advisors, victory is sure. And if you shoot straight with me and I know you love me and you love the church, then okay, let's brainstorm. What's the best idea, not who it comes from. And so I think that's the thing, that the whole autonomy and structure, unity, I think again it goes back to love and relationships, mutual respect. Not, I want to stiff arm you. I'm only going to trust you as far as I can throw you. Is like, no, you're my brother, and we're here to seek and save a lost world. And how can we do this together and build God's kingdom together? So those are some of my feelings.
Well, I think cooperation between churches just makes sense when you, to your point, when you have the right heart. There are other organizations that link up. I mean, it's a natural thing to try to cohere to the people around you to try to get a greater mission done. When I think about, not getting too much into the weeds, but the Christian Missionary Alliance, when you look at certain alliances across, Christian fellowships, they're able to grow really quickly when they decide to trust people. And that's almost an active ingredient. And that's not just exclusive to any particular fellowship. What you see is that that's kind of the trend. And some of these, groups, these alliances, they are getting new churches self-sufficient, self-supporting within 19 months. And
Wow.
and part of how they're doing it too, I think this is something that's important, is, and I don't want to turn this too much into a church building podcast, but when you think about building through the community versus the command center, it's a completely different feel. So the days, and I've been saying this on my podcast, the days of the command center are over. I think that when you look at what COVID has done, which I do lament a little bit of that collective aspect. I like when regions get together. I like when fellowships get together and you can just see this wall of people that God has saved, and it feels unbelievably nourishing. And yet we realize that when you think about the sustainability of fellowships, people heal better in community. And it's harder to reach people when you're not in their community. The fact is, people heal better when they are in community. And so I think that what's coming, and call me crazy, a little bit of blessing in disguise, this pandemic is, I think, to some degree, making us focus more on the community. And if we do that, I think part of what we then do is we build trust where people are at. We're going to them instead of the expectation that they just come to us. Anyway, that's a little bit different. It's a little bit of a rabbit hole. But I think as far as building trust, it's really through community. It's going to someone's school. It's going to someone's concert, and then you see the parents, and that's almost where things are going. It's kind of hard to build trust, and you can, don't get me wrong, but you can, to build trust in 5 minutes, inviting someone to church, amen. But the reality is that you're probably going to have to get in people's life. And I know part of this is about building trust within the fellowship, but I think even when we think of building trust with people we're trying to reach out to, I think it's be important that people have access to us, that we're transparent. And I gotta be honest, Todd, I really love the transparency that I'm getting from you even today. It feels very refreshing just to see how transparent you are. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Appreciate it, Kyle.
You've weathered many storms as a minister. One of the things that you've seen, and I appreciate you mentioned the church split there. You've seen people within a fellowship struggle to get along. You know what that's like to try to get people to have the right hearts. You know what it's like to preach a sermon and maybe even preach past certain people. You know what it's like to have people in your fellowship that have quite a bit of influence, that if they're not, let's say, healed on something, or there's beef going on with other folks, it can create quite a bit of dissension. As we see in Philippi, Paul writes with Euodia and Syntyche, they had quite a bit of pull. This is a big deal. And so getting people to trust one another within fellowships, I have to imagine as an evangelist, is vital, is absolutely essential. What are some things that you want to say about that?
Yeah. Wow, that's a big one too. Um, so one of the things I think I've seen, just weathering the storms, and the Dallas church now is just under 1,300 members. When we started leading it, it was about, I don't know, 750, 770. So over the last 10 years, we've almost doubled,
Yeah.
which is very encouraging. And I remember, golly, about 12, 13 years ago, we moved up to the central part of the Dallas church, the north part, we'd call it. And this was what I would probably classify as the epicenter of the old heartland, the where it all began. It kind of vibrated out all the way up to Kansas and, beyond. And, this group of people were the people that were left were some of the most talented, gifted people in the church, older disciples, maybe empty nesters or older kids. They've seen things. They were converted to Jesus, and they didn't leave. They didn't move. They didn't fall away. They were still here. But man, a lot of them were just bitter, angry, just just stupid things have happened in the church, in the kingdom. And in some ways they're asking themselves, was this a lie? Being a disciple, making those sacrifices they did when they were in their 20s and 30s. And so that's the environment that Patty and I moved back up into the church. And honestly, Kyle, it was almost like no one wanted to be our friend for a couple of years. In fact, the person who probably was the most fired up that we moved back up into this part of the church passed away in a parasailing accident in
I remember hearing
Mexico.
about that. I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, it was absolutely terrible. Margaret Beeman, who was just a huge proponent of us moving back up into the Northwest group, and she passed away, and it just ripped the guts out of the church, especially this part of the church. We actually, in 3 months, we had 4 people pass away, and this is like 12 years ago. And I think, Kyle, it's like, we weren't going anywhere. We love the Dallas church. We love those people. And I knew a lot of these people were hurt and bitter, frustrated, angry. And we're like, you know what? I'm going to love you. I'm going to be your friend. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm not moving. And I had to become more and more vulnerable myself about what I was going through, or where Todd was at. And the bizarrest thing happened, besides Margaret passing away and the other people passing away. Probably about 12 years ago, on a Monday morning, I get an email. And basically the email said, "Hi, my name is Mary Kay, and if you're Todd Asaad, we might be related." And I usually wake up, clean my face, go get my coffee, and sit down and read. This time, I just, for whatever reason, I went straight to my email and I read it first. I don't know, the coffee wasn't ready. And I mean, after reading an email like that, who needs a cup of coffee? And so I emailed this woman back and said, "Well, Colleen Asaad is my mother, and we might be related." I forgot to mention that. She said, "If Colleen Asaad is your mother, we might be related." And so like 2 hours later, this woman emailed me again, and it turns out she was a biological aunt. And so, long story is, the Dallas church was probably at a point that we were separating. We were in 3 regions, you might say, and we were just kind of going our own ways. And we invited 2 people to come in and evaluate the Dallas church. Kind of, hey, outside eyes, come in, interview people, interview the staff, our eldership. What do you see? And my mother was actually visiting us the same week. And so all this came together, and a Monday morning, I get contacted from my biological aunt of my sister of my biological father that I never met before in my life. And so I knew I had a father out there, a biological father, but I never met him. And I was 48 years old.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, that day, every couple hours, we'd go back and she goes, let's talk tonight. She and I spoke, I think, for 6 hours on Monday night. And I was out in my driveway. My mom's inside the house, kind of wondering what's going on. Patty's talking to her, keeping her entertained. I'm meeting my aunt, talking to her on the phone, and she's just sharing with me the family, my background, my father, my family, just everything, and your dad's going to do right by you, blah, 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 just all sorts of stuff. Well, fast forward, I start preaching and I start sharing about this on Sundays. And it's almost like you're watching a episode of some sort of drama, a sitcom, not a sitcom, but like a show that, it only lasts for 30 minutes a day or 30 minutes once a week, 40 minutes, my sermons. And I'm sharing all this story every week for like 2 months with the Northwest region. And, long story short, I'm finally meet my biological father on the phone. Actually, we talk, and that's a whole story in of itself. But about 2-3 weeks later, we're talking probably every other day, every 3 days for like 10 minutes. I think he was ADD, probably struggled with anxiety. He could only talk for like 10 minutes emotionally, and then he had to get off. And I think he was kind of little bites before big bites. So we had a plan to go visit in November. A few weeks later, he doesn't pick up the phone. And I'm like, man, he usually picks up the phone every time we talk on like Sunday night. Tuesday, he calls me back, say, hey, Todd, I'm really sorry. I had pains in my chest and man, I had to go to the hospital. And I'm sitting there talking to him thinking, dude, do not die before I meet you. And sure enough, like a week later, he has a hemorrhagic stroke. We fly up there, I meet our family. He ends up passing away before I can actually talk to him in person. And so emotionally, I'm going through all this stuff. The church is going through all this stuff. And I'm sharing about it from the pulpit. I'm talking to the church, about 300 people in the Northwest region. And this is a group that hadn't grown in years. And I think 1 baptism in 2 years. And I'm sharing with them our story, and they're eating it up. And emotionally, I mean, we're just connected. And that was 12 years ago. And this group is happy, doing great. We split into 2 different groups now, 2 worship centers. And I think overall, it's like that with the whole church. We got 10 elders now, phenomenal board, a big staff, 6 different worship centers, very diverse, young, old, black, white, Asian, Hispanic. I mean, it's a little bit of heaven. It's a gift. And I think, Kyle, to your point, I think learning how to be patient with people, but deeply love people and be willing to be patient. Because again, good theology realizes that we're all broken. We all got issues. And I'm not going to get impatient, or I'm not going to oversensitive. I'm going to be like, hey, I'm going to love you. I'm going to be patient, and we're going to work it out. And It's going to take some time. And I could share tons of stories.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, I think that's what's really helped build that trust between the members and the ministers is learning how to be vulnerable and open and take the time to communicate, because 99% of the body wants to be disciples.
Mm-hmm.
And there might be one person that has mental illness or deep issues that you just can't work through, and that's fine. It'll be obvious. But at the end of the day, people want to be disciples. And so if you take the time and really talk to people, the dividends are huge.
Well, let me just say, I personally feel touched by what you shared and being vulnerable. And I'm really glad that you shared that with your people. When I look at the prophets, when I look at the Bible writers, they were very real about what was going on in their lives. When I look at Paul, I think about his chain of prison letters. He was very open. He would solicit people for prayer. He'd solicit people for support. He was open.
Yeah.
This veneer of togetherness wasn't necessary and really isn't even biblical. The veneer, the posture that we can be in when we're pretending, when we're hiding.
Right.
And so I very much appreciate that. And just thank you for that. And my heart does go out to you. I think about a lot of our ministers, side note, have had really hard relationships with their fathers, or many of our ministers, I actually want to track it statistically. Many of our ministers, their fathers died. That's like a theme that you find. And there's just certain themes that you see with family of origin. Anyway, I want to go back to something just for a moment as it relates to building trust between ministers and members. I recently was on a podcast with Rob Skinner. He invited me on. For our audience, for a moment, go check out Rob Skinner's podcast. He does a phenomenal job, and he has an incredible podcasting voice. I don't have his voice, but he has his voice. Anyway, one of the things I talked about on it was taking the long view on people. That you have what makes a community safe and what makes them nurturing and able to mature people is that you become a part of a community that takes the long view on a person, that sees people not just as they don't just have the ability to make a mess, they can be a mess. And there's nothing about what you shared, Todd, that was clean. You know, when we looked at the scriptures, the story is not clean of redemption. The story is not clean of discipleship. Even repentance is chaotic sometimes.
Yeah.
But taking the long view on people seems to be one of those essential ingredients. And now here's what I want to add, since last time I told Todd that, right? Taking the long view on people and they're a process. I think it's also important to take a long view on ministers. And I just think sometimes we do a short view on ministers, but then there's this expectation that we do a long view when it comes to members. And I think it's so important because it almost feels like in your ministry journey, you have been through several conversions yourself, that you are not even close to the same minister that you began as. And so just for a moment, if you could just kind of share with people how you train ministers now and how that would probably be different than how you used to train them then.
Yeah. You know, then you wanted results. You wanted to see results weekly, all the time. You had to see the stats, a lot of pressure. And I like to grow things. I mean, I was born in Iowa.
Oh,
and
what part of Iowa?
If you come to my house, Northeast Iowa, Waterloo area.
Waterloo,
So
yeah.
actually, yeah, it's not too far from Waterloo, West Union, Iowa, small town in Northeast Iowa. So I have a lot of roots up there, family up there. So I love growing things. And so you come to my house, I got a couple rooms just full of cactus and plants. Then outdoors, I have more plants, and then I have a garden, even though it's Texas. And so I love growing things. And honestly, at the end of the day, it takes time to grow something. It just doesn't happen. And I'm much more concerned about form than I am function. And what I mean by that is, it's, you know what, your character is so important to me, not just what you can produce. I mean, if your character is growing, if you're growing as a man or a woman of God, now certainly you go in the ministry, you got to have some ability. I mean, you got to either be able to, you have great people skills, preaching skills, you can be fruitful. I mean, you got to have some qualities that, okay, yeah, this person can be successful. Then they're not just a good Christian, but every full-time minister needs to be a good Christian, but there's something there that you can work with or work on. And I think character is so huge, because if an individual is willing to put the time and the effort in, willing to suffer, to grow through adversity, hardship, and they show that character, then God's going to bless them. They'll, my joke is, do you know how many churches I've led?
No.
And people will, yeah, like people, well, I don't know, then they'll go out, throw out some numbers, and I say one. Dallas Church is the first church that my wife and I started leading. This is it. This will be the only church probably that we ever lead, just one. But I went through so many stupid things when I was younger. And again, it was more like, hey, what can you produce? What can you do? And I think I've seen a lot of really talented people fail, is because people were more concerned about what they could produce and not their character. And if they would have just given them more time to develop their character, they'd still be here and they'd be incredible leaders. But they got short-circuited because they got into a system that was, produce. And I'm just grateful for how God has allowed us to survive in some ways, and then to create an environment here in Dallas and in Texas that, okay, you know what, we can be patient. We can work with people. I'm not talking about just the church, I'm talking about the staff. And I can work with the staff and work on their character and help them grow as individuals. And, they'll be in it for the long run. They'll be able to sustain this ministry job for 30, 40 years. It won't just be a flash in the pan, and it's like 2-3 years and they're done. Now again, if some people do that, that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. One of my elders, who's one of my best friends, was in the ministry for 2 years up in Kansas, and he got out because he's like, the ministry's not for me. But he was a great businessman. And he became our board president. He became one of our elders. And guess what? He understands ministry. And so he's a huge advocate for the staff because he gets it. He gets the pressure. But he realized he didn't need to be in the ministry. And that's okay. There's a place for people like that in the church. We need people like that in the church. And in fact, some of my best leaders are former staff people. Oh, yeah. I have some incredible foundational people here in Dallas that were unbelievably gifted, talented people. And they still preach every once in a while. They serve in certain areas. But God's put them in different places now.
What's something that you have found? I'm going to kind of do a little bit of just an audible here. One of the things I care very much about is connecting the generations. And so what have you found has been helpful for building trust between the older and the younger generations?
So we have are you talking about on staff, or are you just talking about the church as a whole?
As a whole. Good. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, for us, we have a very diverse staff. And, my thing is, God has put me in a position that I have a lot of authority. Influence is probably a better word. And I have no desire to bear this burden by myself. And so my philosophy is, if I'm going to go down, I'm taking a lot of people with me. And so that means I'm like, I get input. What do you think? What do you think? Get input. And so like on staff, we have a lot of younger people, and younger than my age, we'll put it that way. And very few older than me. There's a few older than me, but not many. But I get their input too. And I think it's the same as the church. When you create an environment of openness and vulnerability, hey, I want to hear what you have to say. what ideas do you have? And a lot of great ideas do come up, and I want to sit and listen. Again, it's not who's right, it's what's right. And so if a 20-year-old comes up to me with a great idea, it's going to get traction because it's a great idea, not because it was brought by a 20-year-old. Same thing with men, women, different ages, ethnicity, backgrounds, color. It doesn't matter. It's like I want to hear your ideas to build God's church. And I think people just want to be respected. And if people feel like they're respected, then they're going to be patient. They know they're listened to, and they're going to be patient with the leaders. And so I think that's the kind of environment we're trying to build here in Dallas. Not that we've perfected it.
Right. No, it's a process. And I really appreciate you in this conversation have been focused on the long view. The way that God sees our lives. It's interesting when I think of becoming a Christian, I think of the baptism date and how on my baptism date, that was just the beginning. Right. And it wasn't the pinnacle, it wasn't the summit, it was the bottom of the mountain in this journey that I'm taking. And what I hear you saying is that conversion, ministry, fellowship, maturity is about a journey. It's not about getting there in this lifetime. And that we always have to, and I'll just say this, we always have to, I think there's two things. I think when it comes to dignity, I think you have a lot of people right now who are trying to recover their sense of dignity. And I think the church, I'd say the church, fellowships have an opportunity to help people to recover something that many of them have never had. And that's their humanity, that's their dignity. Becoming a Christian gives you dignity. It gives you a way to work through what you've been through. It gives you a way to name the things that God wants to use to work in other people's lives. It gives you a ministry for your misery. I think the other thing that it gives you is a way to use your gifts. Churches, you can look at the research, churches that are growing, that sustain growth, they have people who are active in their gifts. And I just want to say for our audience, I'm going to Dallas this week. It's weird that, so it's interesting. Todd and I, we're doing this interview now. We thought about doing it in Dallas. Long story short, I'm going to Dallas to speak at the small church conference. And let me just tell you, man, they got people using their gifts. I've been on the phone with Renee. Her and I've been on the phone over the last couple of days a lot. She's good. She works in TV broadcasting and all that. Anyway, long story short, I can tell that you really believe that your fellowship believes in people being active in their gift. And I just want to say, for those who are trying to figure out how to heal, I'm going to do a different video on this idea of using your gifts to heal from trauma. If you want to move forward, and if you're emotionally stuck, you feel like you've been scarred or whatever, being active in your gift helps you to work through the trauma. It helps you to work through your depression or your anxiety. Be active in your gift. And Todd, I just feel like that's part of at the heart of what you're saying is you've got people who, it's easier to trust one another when I know that another person isn't trying to shut my gift down, right? And then I want to bring theirs out. And there's this symbiotic relationship that we can develop in healthy churches. So I appreciate you sharing that. Is there anything else you wanted to share along any of those lines?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I love that line of thought. I remember about 10 years ago, John Louis, who actually just moved to Dallas, him and Karen, which I'm really excited about with some of their good enough parenting, what they're going to be doing for the Dallas and other churches. But I remember him and I having a long conversation exactly to this point. And I called it like the whole discipleship mentality is that God is in the spirit of recreating us. And, we go from our brokenness into our walk with the Father. And then as we mature and grow to be more like his son, obviously we die and then we're in his presence. But it's a process of the discipleship. John called it reparenting, and the body, the relationships, the fullness of God's relationships allows us to heal our brokenness and to work through our hurts, our dysfunctions, and become all the things that you're talking about right here, and using our gifts to be able to love people, to serve people, then again, John's theology, bearing fruit. I think not only other disciples, but also serving the poor, serving those in need, loving people, using our gifts to do those things. It's like, wow, this person is totally using the blessings that God has given them, and they just radiate love and that kind of relationship. Even in hard times, even in difficult times, you can tell, okay, there's something different about them. So I appreciate what you're saying right now.
Well, before we get ready to close it down and bring it in for a landing, I just want to say for many of our audience members, I really find this conversation to be productive and beneficial. And the reason why I say that is because one of the things I've noticed in this whole ministry is when you name something, it really helps people quite a bit. Like, people love it when you name things, but the thing you've got to do after you name it is you've got to start helping people to move forward and to heal, really at a profound level. And so that's one of the challenges, so to speak, of this ministry and of this channel, is that you got to name it. And I think a lot of people are just naming the thing that they have felt for maybe a decade or whatever it may be. They're naming it. And so as we name something, we can become emotional. We can, we just need to go through a process of refining things. And so I think a lot of people are just naming things, whether it be religious trauma, whether it be legalism. Amen. And the next part of what God has for all of us is growth, is repair, is healing. It's not just naming it. It's not just being stuck in lament. It's not just, being in that gear. I think it's important for us to move forward. And so I just thank you for this conversation today. You've really helped us to not just name, but you've helped us to have a perspective, Todd, about how to move forward. And I think, to your point, you said, 90% of people want to be disciples. I think a lot of people want to move forward. A lot of people want to heal. A lot of people want to put the past into perspective. And so that also will be a process. And that's part of what this channel and what this ministry is about as well. It's about creating perspective for the things that have happened to us and what do we do with those things now. So Todd, thank you for helping to contribute to this very multi-layered conversation, my brother.
Yeah, amen. Kyle, I really appreciate it. Thank you for thinking of me. It's an honor. And I'm very encouraged, and definitely look forward to seeing you this week in Dallas and get some FaceTime and talk a little bit more. And I'm sure there'll be other times, other thoughts we'll be engaging on.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, I want to say to you what I said to all my guests, that we are with you and God is for you, my brother.
Amen. Thank you, Kyle. Love you.
Love you. And for those of watching, I want to thank you so much for staying through the entirety of the video. So many of you don't just stay to the end, you watch them over and over and over again. And I don't think that this interview will be an exception to that. Please continue to like, share, and subscribe. I just reached, I can't believe it, 2,000 subscribers. What are you guys doing? And I always hope that people are reading their Bibles just as much as they're watching these videos. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.